In a quiet valley surrounded by mountains and endless skies, there stood a village that seemed, at first glance, like any other. Children ran through the fields, chasing one another. Women drew water from the river, and men worked tirelessly in the soil to provide for their families. Yet, beneath the harmony of daily life, there were unspoken battles. Battles fought not on fields with swords, but within the hearts of ordinary people. Among them lived a young man, barely past his youth, yet already burdened by a weight that no one else could see. To the outside world, he was just another villager, someone who worked in the fields, greeted neighbors with a polite smile, and lived quietly. But behind that smile lived a storm. Every day, he measured himself against others, and every day he came up short. He saw the blacksmith, whose arms were like iron, praised by all for his strength. He saw the scholar, admired for his wisdom, consulted whenever disputes arose. He saw the musicians, whose songs filled the evenings with joy, their names spoken with affection. And then he looked at himself and asked a question that pierced his heart. What am I compared to them? What do I bring? The young man tried. He tried harder than most. But no matter what he did, his efforts never seemed enough. His hands blistered faster than the blacksmith's, his words stumbled where the scholars flowed like rivers, his voice cracked where the singers soared. And so each failure became a brick, and with each brick, he built a wall of self-doubt around his heart. He began to believe that he was a mistake, a flawed creation in a world that only celebrated perfection. And though he never said it aloud, he carried this silent despair wherever he went. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in shades of fire and gold, the young man sat alone on the stone steps in the village square. Laughter surrounded him, children's voices echoing, merchants calling, elders telling stories, but he felt as though he lived in another world entirely. Their joy was unreachable, like stars he could see but never touch. He buried his face in his hands and whispered into the shadows, "Why was I made this way? Why can't I be like them? Strong, smart, perfect." Yet life, in its mysterious way, often answers questions when silence is the loudest. That evening, a figure appeared in the square. A man far older, leaning on a wooden staff worn smooth by decades of use. His back was bent, his hair white, his eyes clouded by time. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, yet his presence carried a weight deeper than any crown. He was the oldest man in the village, one who had lived through wars and famines, through the rise and fall of leaders, through the laughter of births and the tears of funerals. People respected him, not because he was flawless, but because he had seen enough to understand what truly mattered. He sat near the young man. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was not empty. It was full, heavy, and alive, like the stillness before a storm or the pause before a sacred song. And in that silence, the young man noticed something. The old man was far from perfect. His body shook with tremors, his hands bore scars, his eyes were dim by time. Yet the village loved him. They sought his advice, they trusted his words, they cared for him with honor. How strange, the young man thought, that a man so clearly imperfect could hold so much worth in the eyes of others. That thought stirred something within him. It was small at first, like a spark in the darkness, but it grew. And as it grew, memories began to return. He remembered the moon. As a child, he had spent countless nights staring at it, marveling at its silver glow. Yet, he knew its face was scarred with craters, its surface cracked and broken. Did anyone stop admiring the moon because of its scars? No. They admired it because, despite its scars, it shone. In fact, its beauty was inseparable from its imperfections. He remembered the river that cut through their fields. It did not flow in a straight line. It twisted, bent, sometimes even flooded. Its path was irregular, imperfect, yet without it, no crops would grow, no life would thrive. Its very flaws allowed it to nourish the land. And then another memory came, one he had buried long ago. When he was a boy, he had broken a clay pot while helping his mother fetch water. Panicked and ashamed, he had begged her to throw it away. But she had smiled gently and kept it. For months afterward, she used that cracked pot to carry water from the river. And he noticed something miraculous. Along the path where the pot leaked, wildflowers began to bloom. Bright reds, yellows, and blues. A broken pot carrying life where none had been before. The young man's chest tightened as tears filled his eyes. All this time, he had cursed his flaws, believing they made him useless. But now, for the first time, he wondered, what if my cracks were not curses? What if they were the very things that gave me meaning? He looked again at the old man beside him, at the tremors in his hands, the frailty in his body, and yet the light in his presence. Perhaps the world did not value perfection as he thought. Perhaps it valued authenticity, kindness, courage, the invisible qualities that no flaw could erase. As the sun slipped below the horizon, the young man rose from the steps. His heart was not completely healed. He still felt the weight of his doubts, but something had shifted. He no longer saw his flaws as prisons. He began to see them as windows. That night, he walked home differently. He lifted his head and looked at the moon, scarred yet glowing, and for the first time, he smiled. He touched the wildflowers by the roadside, blooming from the water of a broken pot, and whispered, "Maybe I too can bloom." Days turned to weeks, and though nothing about his abilities changed overnight, his perspective did. He stopped comparing his voice to the singers, his words to the scholars, his strength to the blacksmiths. Instead, he began to notice small ways he could serve, small ways he could give. When an elder needed help carrying wood, he was there. When a child dropped their toy, he returned it with a smile. When a neighbor sat in grief, he offered his silent company. And without realizing it, people began to look at him differently. Not as perfect, not as flawless, but as kind, as dependable, as someone who made their lives a little brighter, not in grand ways, but in quiet ones. And then, one day, standing again in the square where he had once wept, the young man realized something profound. Perfection had never been the measure of worth. Perfection was an illusion, a mirage that led him into despair. Worth was found in being real, in being human, in embracing the cracks and allowing light to shine through them. And so, the young man's story became more than his own. It became a lesson for us all. For how many of us have stood where he stood, looking at others, comparing ourselves, drowning in the belief that we are less because we are not perfect? How many of us have cursed our scars, our mistakes, our imperfections, never realizing they may be the very things that make us valuable? Nobody is perfect. Not the moon, not the river, not the clay pot, not the old man in the square, and not you. But in that imperfection lies something far greater than perfection could ever offer: authenticity, humanity, and irreplaceable worth. So the next time you look in the mirror and find only flaws, remember the cracked pot that watered flowers. Remember the moon that lights the night despite its scars. Remember the river that nourishes despite its crooked path. And most of all, remember this: you do not need to be perfect to be worthy. You already are. And as you carry this truth in your heart, let it transform the way you live. For when you stop chasing perfection and start embracing yourself, you not only free yourself, you inspire others to do the same. Because nobody is perfect, and that is exactly why every one of us is priceless.